Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How you guys going? We're going to talk a little bit more today about the game KeyForge. And in case any of you guys missed this, this was the final note at the end of the in-flight presentation for FFG this year at Gen Con. This is a new game they're unveiling, not part of any one of their licensed IPs. It's not Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings. This is a brand new IP and the game has been designed by none other than Mr. Richard Garfield himself, which is a pretty big deal. In case you guys aren't aware, this is the guy that invented Magic. Basically invented the whole idea of a trading card game in the first place. And this is not a trading card game. This is what's called a unique deck game. You don't buy packets, you don't buy boosters, you don't draft, you don't trade. You buy completely pre-sealed decks that are completely ready to go. These decks are procedurally generated. They actually have in-game mechanics that are designed to work together. The system that makes them know to try and pair certain cards together in order to make a cohesive deck. Now what you're left with is a very cool, unique idea for a card game. Now I've seen a lot of comments so far, both at Gen Con and on my channel, about people saying, oh, well, why can't we trade cards? Why can't we get boosters and that kind of stuff? And I just want to encourage anyone that's saying that kind of thing to consider playing a game like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Destiny or something like that, because those games already exist. They're fantastic. I'm a Magic player myself. I love the game. This is not that game. This is a completely unique, fresh take on the idea of how we even play card games. And from that point of view, I find it very, very appealing, and it seems like a lot of you guys do too. In this video, we're going to cover the basic rules of how this is done. Now, there are a few things in the rulebook here that I'm not going to go over. There's archives, there's like a balancing system where you use chains. I'm not going to cover all that kind of stuff. We're just going to go through the basic turn cycle of how the game runs. And hopefully, if any of you guys are like on the fence trying to work out whether you want to play this, hopefully this video will give you some kind of indication over whether this is a game you will like. In any case, this video is not designed to be a replacement for just going and reading the rulebook. It's currently up on the KeyForge subsite on FFG's website. I strongly recommend that you all go and read it just to double check all the finer points. All the information's there. It's super straightforward. It's a 13-page document. Very, very simple game. Going to be very, very accessible for even more casual players, which I think is a fantastic thing. And yeah, without further ado, let's dive right into this. So just talking broadly in terms of what you want to do in this game, your goal as a player is to forge 3 keys, as the name might suggest. You do that by amassing a resource known as Amber, represented by these tokens here. Various game effects allow you to hoard these, and at the beginning of your turn, if you own 6 or more Amber, you get to forge one of your key tokens, making it look like this. Once you get to 3 key tokens, you win the game. So the objectives are pretty straightforward. But how exactly do you do that? What does the battlefield look like? Well, here it is on the screen in front of us. We're going to have a look at what a standard play area is going to look like. First of all, off to the side, you have all the generic resources which both players have access to. We've got damage tokens, amber tokens, and also these status cards which can be applied to creatures if certain things in the game says they should be. Off to the other side, you have your deck, just like any standard card game. This is where you draw your cards that you're able to play. And next to that, you have your identity card, which looks very, very similar to the back of the draw deck cards actually. Now these cards all have on them printed the name of your deck, which is very, very impressive actually. The fact that these all have unique printings. The names on the decks are also procedurally generated. No 2 names are the same. And on the identity card, you have these 3 symbols across the bottom. And these represent the various houses within the world of KeyForge. There are 7 unique houses, at least in this early stages of the game. And these represent different archetypes and playstyles. And every single card in the game, apart from your Archon here, is attributed to one of these 7 houses. Each deck has an even number of cards from 3 of those houses. The rest of the blank space on the play area is dedicated to your discard pile, which is next to your deck. This is where you can put cards that you no longer want if a creature dies. If you play an event and you fulfill all the requirements on that card, it goes to the discard pile. Basically, this is where all your cards go once they've been used. The battle line up here in front is where all your creatures live while they're still alive and fighting for you. And also behind your battle line is an area for artifacts. Artifacts are things that stay on the battlefield which also give you some kind of positive effect. In fact, before we go into anything else, let's go have a look at all the different kind of cards you can play. We have actions, artifacts, creatures, and upgrade. Now, actions are cards that come into play, have some kind of effect, and you discard them. For example, here, Cleansing Wave, deal 1 damage to each creature, gain 1 amber for each creature healed this way. Artifacts and creatures both stay on the battlefield and give you value as the game goes on. You can repeatedly use them to do various things within the game, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Upgrades are cards that you physically attach to your creatures. You just slip the card behind it, and it gives them some kind of upgrade. It makes them better in combat, gives them some kind of keyword, all kinds of things. Basically, if you read the cards, they will explain the kind of effects they have on the game. So with all that in mind, let's talk about how it's all played out. At the very start of the game, you determine who goes first randomly. The player who goes first draws 7 cards, and the player who goes second draws 6 cards. And then if you don't like your opening hand, you have a chance to mulligan. You mulligan by shuffling all the cards back into your deck and drawing a hand of 1 fewer amount than you previously had. Now, the reason the player who goes first has 1 extra card is because the player who goes first also can only play 1 card during their turn. This is so one player doesn't get ahead really fast. It tries to balance out the upside of beginning to play cards first. Now, a hand. Let's say it looks like this, for example. In the top right hand corner of all of these cards is a symbol denoting what house each of these cards are from. Before you play any of your cards, you must announce which house you want to play cards from this turn. And that chosen house also tells you which creatures you're allowed to use in combat or actions during the turn as well. So it is very important. You're not always just going to pick the house of which you have the most cards in your hand. You are eventually going to have to start picking the house which you have best represented on the battlefield as well. So there is a bit of balance built into the game in that way. Now, for example, if I were to choose the house Sanctum, I could play these 2 cards during this turn, assuming I'm not going first anyway. Staunch Knight and Protect the Weak. If I wanted to play the Brobner house, I could play Valda and Warsong during my turn. Now, this is an example of a hand that happens to have 2 cards from each house, but this is not always going to happen. Sometimes you're going to have 1 card from a house and like 3 or 4 cards from another. And the upside of picking a house where you have the most cards of representing your hand is you simply get to play more cards during your turn. There is no limit to how many cards you get to play a turn. In this game, there is no resource system that dictates how many you can play. You can play the biggest creature on the very first turn. And this is one of the key things that makes this game unique. Because the decks are procedurally generated, this kind of stuff can exist and still be balanced. We don't have things like land from Magic the Gathering or energy from Pokemon as a way of balancing out decks and trying to make things even. Now, having a look at that battle line once more time, this is an example of what your battle line might look like on the battlefield. We have a Staunch Knight here with Protect the Weak attached to him. We have a Mother, and we have Champion Anaphyl on the right hand side as well. Now, if you want to go ahead and play another one of these creature cards, it enters the battlefield exhausted, which is what it looks like when it's on its side. Once a creature is exhausted, it cannot be used, it can't fight, it can't use its actions. It must be re-readied before it can do all of those things. Both creatures and artifacts enter the battlefield exhausted and are readied at the end of your turn. Also, in the case of creatures on this battle line, they come in on either your left hand or right hand flank, which just means the left or right of the battlefield. As creatures leave the battle line, if they return to your hand, if they're destroyed, the remaining creatures move in and create one cohesive line again. You don't leave gaps in the middle of your battle line. It is also important to note, talking about flanks, that some creatures do care about flanks. In the case of Staunch Knight here, he gets +2 power while it is on a flank. If you want to go ahead and play another Staunch Knight, in this example, you'd probably want to put him on the right-hand side flank, making sure that both your Staunch Knights get a bonus. If you were to put your new Staunch Knight on the left-hand flank, your existing one would lose that bonus. Once creatures are on the battlefield and ready, they can then use actions or fight. Now, when you do an action, basically, you turn the card sideways, you exhaust it, and you do whatever the action says. If you want to fight a creature, well, that's a bit of a different story. To allow a creature to fight, you must have at least one eligible creature on your opponent's side that you can fight, and then you elect that creature, turn your creature sideways, and then they fight. And what happens when a creature fights is they simply deal damage equal to their power to each other. In the example down here, you, the player, have Champion Anaphyl, and you want to fight the Terror on your opponent's side. Now, the power on these cards is that red diamond, which is in the middle left-hand side of the card. And this both represents the amount of damage your creature can take before it dies and the amount of damage it deals. Now, in some games like Magic the Gathering, those numbers are separate. In this game, it's a bit more streamlined. It's just the one single number. Also, there's one more factor when we're talking about fighting. There's also an armor rating on the other side of the card. That's that little shield thing there. The Terra has no armor rating, but Champion NFL does have an armor rating of 1. And that means whenever he suffers damage, you deal 1 less damage. So, in the example of this fight, Champion NFL exhausts himself, fights the Terra. The Terra would go to your opponent's discard pile because your power is greater than his power. And Champion NFL would take the 5 damage from Terra, which turns into 4 damage after you apply the armor rating. Pretty straightforward. Artifacts work a very similar way to creatures. They just don't go on the battle line. They go elsewhere on your playmat. And they just do whatever they say on the card. In the example of Gauntlet of Command, you have an action. So, Gauntlet of Command would come in exhausted, and on your next turn, you get to do this. Ready and fight with a friendly creature. So, if for the turn after you manage to get a Gauntlet of Command onto the play area, you can say, okay, I'd like to activate the Brobnar house. I'm going to play a Brobnar creature. I'm then going to use the Gauntlet of Command to ready that creature, and then I can fight with him. I can use actions with him. Brobnar, by the way, out of all the houses, seems to have powerful creatures and is the most aggressive. Makes sense. The symbol is kind of like a red fiery swirl. That's kind of the archetype that house is going for. Also, some artifacts, and we don't actually have any images of these yet, instead of the word action on their card, they have the word Omni. And the only difference between action and Omni, they still exhaust and do whatever it says on the card, but abilities next to Omni can still be used even in the event that you have activated a different house for that turn. For example, if Gauntlet of Command had Omni and then the rest of that text, you could say activate Sanctum and still use this, which would be very, very versatile. Perhaps as a rough rule, artifacts with Omni abilities will be a little bit less powerful to sort of counteract that versatility. Now, all of this is great. You know how to play creatures. You know how to make your battle line more powerful than your opponent's. But as I said before at the start of this video, the key thing is you want to collect amber and forge keys. And there are a few ways to do that. First of all, as you play cards, there are some of these cards with a little amber symbol in the top left-hand corner. And that simply means as you play them, you get an amber token and you put it onto your identity card. Also, some cards do come into play and have play. And just like collecting amber, you get to do those abilities. And in some cases, like with the Terra, for example, those abilities can get you amber. But probably the most common way, at least I'm guessing the most common way to get amber in the game of KeyForge, is to simply reap with your creatures. You reap in the same way you would activate an action or fight with a creature. You exhaust it and then you just get an amber. And that's it. Straightforward. Exhaust a creature, get an amber. Now, it is important to note that when you do this, you can't use the actions on these creatures and you can't fight with them. So it's probably something you want to consider doing when you have a bigger board. But I find this very, very interesting because I think this is going to be very telling of the way some decks play in KeyForge. We see this a lot in games like Pokemon, Magic the Gathering. The speed of a deck is a very, very important thing. I get the impression there are going to be some decks that want to sort of go wide and sort of beat out your opponent in terms of the size of your battle line, and then you want to start reaping late in the game and sort of do it all at once and make those keys bang, bang, bang. But there'll be some decks that want to aggressively get amber and won't worry so much about reaping with your creatures late in the game and sort of just outracing your opponent. The speed of the game is what really makes me curious, and sort of how these decks are designed to play, how fast they are. It's just very, very curious to me. There's several different ways of getting amber, and I think the kind of ways that your deck offers to get amber is going to be very, very telling of how it plays and what kind of speeds it plays at. And that is pretty much how you play KeyForge. Again, if this interests you, I strongly recommend you have a look at the rules reference. I didn't cover absolutely everything in this video. I just want to have a rough guide for you guys. So hopefully you guys get some kind of indication as to why I'm very excited to learn about this game. I'm going to continue covering it. The early response to this seems very positive. So in the meantime, guys, stay tuned. There's plenty more KeyForge content to come on this channel. Like and subscribe, like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit, and I'll catch you guys later.